All right, everyone, we start off today trying to do some predictive analysis about what will happen with regards to midterm polling and Biden's approval polling as the result of the declaration of the official Joe Biden recession. Of course, that's a few days ago. That has not yet shown up in polling. Those numbers were released too late in the last week for that really to have an impact. And of course, the polling period is more than a day, generally speaking. Sometimes it's upwards of a week. So as of this week, we're going to start seeing new polls that reflect perhaps a different economic reality than you had even a week ago, and it will have some sort of impact with regards to polling for Dem and GOP candidates. Depends on their economic outlook a little bit. It is malleable. It's not really just the party itself and a general effect. Individuals within a party, of course, are affected differently according to the constituents that they have, their age, their composition in the partisan sense, etc., what positions and votes they've taken. It can dull or amplify the impact of these things. We can't look at it as a one-size-fits-all situation. Here's my thoughts. Here's my prediction. As far as Biden's approval goes, I don't expect that the announcement of a Biden recession does very much. He's already hit a new floor and ceiling, which I predicted weeks ago was going to happen. His new ceiling of disapproval is very close to 60%, which, by the way, is very damning. His approval level has stabilized at maybe 37 or thereabouts. That's also quite bad. It is the worst for any modern president at this point in the first term. And so, I mean, there's nowhere to go but down from here. You're going to get new inflation numbers in a couple of weeks. The general consensus is they won't be great, and that the slowdown will probably continue. This is why Joe Biden has already laid the groundwork to effectively just blame the Fed for all of these problems. Here's the effect on Biden's approval in general, in a nutshell. The problem with it damaging him much further is that if a person, he's at a new floor and ceiling, so there's a stable movement for some weeks, and I see that trend continuing. The people that still support him obviously are not in the socioeconomic category where the recession is really affecting them yet. These tend to be people who are so poor that it already sucked before. Well, things suck a little bit more, but the government is just giving you more welfare to cover it. You don't really notice the difference. Your life sucked, it sucks, and it will suck. That's the long and short of it. That's like 20% of the population. Most of those people support Joe Biden still. Then there are people in the upper middle class and above that lean liberal in some case, and then there are hardline Dem partisans. So these people are going to be more reluctant to not approve of Joe Biden. It may not be that they support him particularly much, but if you're a Dem partisan, you're looking at the Republicans and saying they want to have guns everywhere and women barefoot and in the kitchen. Well, I guess Biden's not so bad after all. Yeah, I'm in a bread line, but at least it's Biden bread. At least there's no little Republican sticker on the bread loaf that I get to eat today, courtesy of the generosity of the government that robbed people. So I don't think it has a huge impact on his polling. If anything, it just restrains his approval and holds it down, but can't really push it lower. I think you need even more crisis in order for that to happen. Now, it could be wrong and it could fall further. I think, though, that it remains on a stable trajectory. Now, what does it mean for other Dem candidates? I think that it's bad for them, generally speaking. I can't imagine that the announcement of a recession, even if it's blunted by a wall of legacy media propaganda muddying the waters and pretending that there is no recession, I can't imagine that it earns you any votes. It doesn't make somebody support Biden when that's announced or when the inflation numbers are announced that didn't before. It's not going to compel them that the economy is healthy, and that really is the major issue, is that the economy is the main issue. Inflation and jobs and so forth are number one as regards to politics most of the time. Unless you're in an active major war or there's some sort of other major crisis going on, like a COVID sort of thing that's in the popular consciousness, it tends to be the economy. And indeed, polling over the last 2 years has repeatedly found that is number one, partially because Biden has wrecked the economy. So let's say I'm a Dem candidate, and I'm in basically a 50-50 race, and I have reasonably similar levels of overall partisan support, charisma, the ability to speak, debate, etc., similar budgeting, similar number of ads to my opponent. I think that this puts me as the Democratic candidate in that situation at a disadvantage. And it'll be different from race to race. Different districts have different compositions of people likely to vote for a candidate, regardless of the polling. It could nudge the races in one direction or the other by, let's say, just a point. The problem for the Democrats is that there are so many House toss-up races that probably impacts a half a dozen different races. Just from one single point of change overall nationally away from the Democrats as the result of the economy being declared to be poor. This is again why Joe Biden got out ahead of it and said there is no recession, but if there is, it's the fault of the Fed. He laid the groundwork a month prior by saying that my idea for inflation is to let the Fed do its job. Unfortunately, some partisan lemmings who are inclined to believe everything that he says don't understand that there's a huge amount of lag in the economic data, and so they will blame the downturn on the Fed successfully, even though it was halfway through the second quarter, which already went sharply negative, and long after the first quarter that was already negative before the Fed took any action. It wasn't until a couple of months ago. That's well into Q2. They will still blame it on them. They're looking for an excuse to continue supporting Biden effectively. So while it will have an impact, and under normal circumstances, like if the media actually did its job and reported fairly on economic issues and wasn't literally taking marching orders in the White House, as was revealed months ago by Darcy of CNN, if they were actually reporting on it and giving straight news, Biden's approval would take a considerable hit. The Democratic candidates, their roster would take a significant hit. You'd probably see, for instance, the Warnock-Walker race would probably be a 50-50 sum game. We're going to have to wait for roughly 2 weeks to get a new set of polls in, a new docket of polls, before we know what specifically has happened with regards to polling. Meanwhile, there is a counterbalance. The Republicans are overstretching, in my opinion. I realize it's at the state level, but on abortion, I think that they are rankling some people. They're effectively justifying the Democrats' cries of them being fascist, fanatics, etc. What happened is that the Republicans were getting a boost partially because the Democrats were being so fervent with regards to abortion, and they had like the Ralph Northam thing going on. They were making the argument that you should have, 9-month abortions. There was critical race theory. There were all these issues on which the Democrats were losing handily. The Republicans, in their reaction to this, instead of saying, hey, we want to ban 9-month abortions, have instead in some states banned them outright, effectively banned them outright, causing the culture war aspect of that to flip, advantage Democrats, which I predicted would happen. It's unfortunate, but it did. On CRT, they've almost sidelined the issue. I don't know why they're not talking more about education. The Republicans really should go with 3 platforms going into the midterms. The economy sucks, the Democrats have lost their goddamn minds on education, and the border is completely fucked up. Focus on Mayor Bowser and her NIMBYist appraisal of the situation in D.C. after Greg Abbott's and the Arizonan government's busing into that area, where now they're asking for the National Guard to step in and open a bigger military-style processing center because they've got like 5,000 illegals in the city. Focus on the hypocrisy. Focus on the NIMBYism. Instead of accentuating state-level decisions that the National Party doesn't even directly participate in, it's state houses and governors doing that, where they're focusing on things like abortion. Focus on education more. Fight back against critical race theory. It's a winning issue. Instead, the Republicans are stupidly blundering into several issues on which they don't really have the cultural advantage. They did because the Democrats looked like they had gone way out into la-la land, but then the Republicans said, instead of standing our ground and saying, let's have some fucking sense here, people, you're gone nuts. That was what the public was saying. Instead, they decided to go way off in the other direction in certain cases, hazarding their own position. Now, you may think, of course, that's justified or ethical or pragmatic. I happen to disagree, but it's definitely not politically helpful. But they've done it anyway. So I think it'll be a blunted effect overall. Under normal circumstances, you fall into a recession at a time when you've already got a legendarily unpopular sitting president in the party and a bunch of freakish morons like AOC that are way off in Looney Tunes land, leftoid land. Normally, you would think that it would be crushing for them and that this would crush them even further. The Republicans have managed to create a situation in which the effect will be lesser than that. Again, not helpful for the Democrats. It does have an impact. I guarantee it will impact the midterms. It might even save the Republicans from snatching defeat from the jaws of victory because of their own blundering. But it won't have as much of an impact as it would have under normal circumstances. That's my belief. That's about all. Peace out.